And here we can see Abraham about to sacrifice his son Isaac. Looks like a terrible story, but in fact it points to a time, if Abraham existed. Now I'm just going to talk as if all these people existed. I was taught it's mostly made up. I don't actually believe that. In fact, I think there are babies in these bathwater stories. But in this particular image, we could say, wow, as I thought as a kid, this is kind of sick. God gives him this kid Isaac after his wife is buried for so long. Then he's going to tell him to kill his own kid. And out of faith, Abraham's going to do it until at the last minute God says, oh, just kidding. You don't have to, Abraham. But what we really have in this story is a pointing to the end of human sacrifice. Think about it, 1800 BCE, and yet as of the 1500s, even today it still happens. Sometimes we see evidence of human sacrifice. So there's Abraham, but let's go back in time a bit. And note, as I like to tell students, the Bible is hot off the presses in terms of human history. It is not really a very new book when we look at this timeline of human empires and civilizations. We looked at Sumer and Babylon in the first days. Any guesses when the first mention of Israel occurs on this timeline in another culture's writings? The word Israel. Just a guess? Anyone know? Quite astonishing. No one ever does, so don't feel bad. 1100 BCE. That means very late in the day, and about 3,000 years after Sumer has existed already. So the Bible is an incredible compendium of the literature of Egypt and Babylon. And of course, a lot of things that many in the science realm can't accept. But if we were to throw that Bible baby and bathwater out, we wouldn't have society today. And that Bible is still the #1 best-selling book on the planet, and is followed by the plurality of people on the planet. So we think of the Adam and Eve story. Some want to laugh, like Bill Meyer, for instance, that anyone who would believe that a talking snake taught a lady, to feed the fruit to her husband. What we really have here with the Bible, though, is a remembrance of life as tribal peoples, the first topic we covered, and the idea that actually civilization caused us pain. And in fact, it is a fact that the tribal hunter-gathering people worked a lot less than we do today, and arguably had a better lifestyle. So what's happening here isn't some silly myth to be thrown out now that we know humans existed more than 5,000 years ago. It points to the fact of our loss of innocence as more animal-type beings, and I don't think that made us worse or lesser. In fact, they say we've devolved cognitively from the people who had to hunt and gather food. I don't think I could hunt anything myself. I can hardly find my glasses. And so just to remember, this is the time Abraham faced. He is from, in fact, Ur, the city at the bottom of Sumer. This makes Judaism and Abrahamic religions Babylonian in origin. The Bible does not like Babylon. Why? Because it is the seat of the first civilizations. If you think of the Cain and Abel story, God likes Abel's gift of sheep offerings, because that is the nomadic tribes people's way of life. But Cain offers agricultural products. God rejects them, right? And then agricultural Cain kills nomadic Abel. So the Bible has a very deep message, I think, in opposing the evils of hierarchically stratified societies with kings and the like. The gods that predate Jehovah, Yahweh, or God, were very warlike gods. We have Marduk of Babylon, Ashur of Assyria, and Baal of Palestine. We can see Baal with his sword in hand. And here we can see Marduk slaying the chaos monster Tiamat. And out of her body he makes the earth, and out of her consort, the stupid Kingu, he makes human beings from Kingu's blood mixed with Tiamat's body. And lurking behind that is, in Genesis, God breathed on the face of the deep. And it is a cognate, Hebrew tehom, with Tiamat, so I was trained to believe. And so lurking behind the scenes is Marduk and Baal, or Baal, as you may have heard him called in Sunday school. This is what the Tower of Babel would have looked like according to my best scientific reconstruction I can find. And so this was the largest structure on the whole planet at the time. And it was a symbol for Israelite religion of arrogance and human pride and the power that comes with civilization and society. Abraham, as we know, will travel from Ur to what is today called Israel and Palestine, but belonged to the Canaanites before Abraham ever emerged. The Canaanites worshipped El, and we find this word El in the Hebrew Bible. The first 5 books are Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The earliest phases call God El, but also Elohim, which is a plural of El, Eloh. Eloh is a cognate with the Arabic word Allah. How about that? Meaning God. But Elohim means the gods. And so in Genesis, when it says, let us make humans in our image, it points to a polytheistic background in Genesis that will, of course, dissolve by the time of Isaiah. But here we can see El with a wife, just like all the other city-state religions. He has a son, Baal, and some think Yam, Nahar, the god of the sea, might have evolved into Yahweh. That is very speculative. I won't hold my sign my name to that. But here's Baal doing the standard heroic things. Who was this guy, and why does the Bible dislike him throughout the writings of the prophets? His name simply means master or lord. So it's not a proper name. Here he's killing Lotan, known to the Bible as Leviathan, and many motifs will live on the same way. Here's Hercules killing the Hydra, and so many heroic things Baal does. Now, when it comes to this story, the original Babylonian flood story just had Utnapishtim on a raft with some goats and chickens as the Tigris-Euphrates flooded. I think we talked about that the first day. The Bible has expanded this story, Paul Bunyan style, into every animal and the giant ark and so forth. There was, in fact, a great flood, though, 5000 BCE. The Bible's remembered through these other people's literature some amazing geological facts they've proven. I could go on about this, but let's look at the biggest one. You can see the Black Sea up here prior to 6500 BCE. And then the Hellespont floods, breaks, and the Mediterranean fills in all of this region today. And the Bible even has the ark landing right on the border of the Black Sea, not in Israel as you might suspect. And they found cities buried at the bottom of the Black Sea. So there was a great flood. It just didn't happen to cover the entire planet or wipe out all of life, but there you have it. For a Bronze Age book, the Bible does a remarkable job. And for many millennia, people thought it was an actual history of the planet in Roman and Greek times. The Bible sees all humans emerging from Noah's son, Japhethites or Europeans, Hamites or African Semites, are Arabs and Hebrews and the rest. The Bible doesn't know about Chinese people, so there's no son from Noah for the Chinese, right? We can't expect a Bronze Age text to be a 21st century work of science. And that's where I get frustrated with both fundamentalists and atheists who just want to write off this incredible book. Abraham is told, and it turns out to be true, his descendants will be more numerous than the stars. And to this day, right today, 3.4 billion people on the planet are either Christians, Jews, or Muslims, and thus descendants of Abraham. Now, here he is. He's not simply a Bedouin trader. He's more of a rich caravan type trader. So in other words, not a king, not a big guy, but definitely a powerful merchant, and not just simply a desert dweller. And here is a depiction of Abraham's meeting with Melchizedek, the righteous king. And we see this Canaanite king and Abraham are both worshiping El together. In those days, when you came to a new land, you worshiped the local god. It would be as if in Wisconsin, we worship Packer, don't we? But if we traveled across the border in those Bronze Age times, we would worship Viking. Viking has this turf, and it's like a franchise for a McDonald's or something like that. But we can see here there's no distinctive Israelite religion from this story. And Abraham here in this famous scene, God tells his wife, who's 80-some years old, she's going to have a kid, and she laughs. So hence, when Isaac, or he who laughs, is born, Abraham kicks out his oldest son and his mother, Hagar, and Ishmael. Muslims and Arabs will see this as the beginnings of the Arabic peoples, and thus the beginnings of Islam. They see Ishmael as their ancestor, and it's even said Ishmael and Abraham together built the Kaaba shrine in Mecca, believe it or not. Here he is again, the end of human sacrifice, but mostly it's Abraham's utter faith in this God. What we're going to note about these three religions, unlike any we've looked at so far, is that this is one continuing storyline. These are historical religions. Often it is a boast of Jews and Christians and Muslims that there's an historical religion. Well, that is a claim to fame for sure. It is valuable. But we've seen the value in these other non-historical religions of Asia. And so, genealogy is very important to the Bible. So-and-so begat so-and-so, and all of this going back to origins historically is a critical feature. Abraham gives birth to Isaac, gives birth to Jacob. Jacob then is, in fact, Israel. His name, Yaakov, or Jacob, means the supplanter, because he stole the inheritance, if we know this, from his brother Esau through a trick of putting fake hair on his hands. Sounds kind of lame, doesn't it? Isaac couldn't see too well, so he gives his inheritance to Jacob. Throughout the Jewish religion, the smart, kind of scrawny guy who's mama's favorite tends to prevail over the big oaf. It'll happen with David and Goliath, happens again and again. Here we see Jacob going up Jacob's ladder to heaven. Here we see where the word Israel comes from. Jacob is struggling with this angel, and Israel literally means he who struggles with God. So that's where we get the name Israel. It is a second name for Jacob. And the whole tradition will indeed be a struggle. Unlike many of the other religions, it will be about sin and disobedience to one powerful being up there. And speaking of which, we move through quite a few centuries already. And here we can see Moses receiving the laws from, now we have a new name for God. Not the generic kind of Canaanite El or Elohim, the gods. Somehow, miraculously, in the 13th century, before the Common Era, give or take, This man Moses with an Egyptian name, who the Bible tells us is Egyptian, and who is living around the time of Akhenaten, who will deny the existence of the many gods of Egypt and proclaim the sun disk is the only God, the Aten. We wonder if there's not a connection between this Moses, whose name we may know other Egyptian pharaohs like Tutmoses, this man with an Egyptian name leading these slaves on a rebellion out of Egypt. If there's not a connection with Akhenaten's kind of monotheism. That's speculative, but the Bible tells us God and his heavenly hosts were so powerful and enormous that Mount Sinai had to expand to contain God's glory. So unlike Buddhism or Confucianism or Taoism, we're talking about, or even Hinduism, powerful as those gods and goddesses were at killing demons and the like, this God of Israel is immense and enormous and transcendent and completely beyond our world. Our world is completely dependent on the God of Israel according to Abrahamic practitioners. And so here we can see the only way we can depict God according to Jewish tradition. And these four letters, I can call God the four letters, or I can call God, as a devout Jew, the Tetragrammaton, which means the four letters in Greek. But I can in no wise depict God, and why? Here Moses is smashing the golden calf, simply a fertility rich object, and associated with Baal worship, but many others. The calf, of course, gives milk and all this. And Moses smashes his tablets of the law, destroying this calf. And this is a motif that Jews and Muslims and Jehovah's Witnesses and a number of other Protestants will maintain is the proper attitude towards God. Never make an image of God or Christ. So here, after wandering, as we know, for 40 years in the desert, Moses hits the boundary of Abraham's old Canaan. Now, if we take the story as true, these Israelites came down originally from Canaan. The 12 tribes of Israel, or Jacob, they're his sons. And they are first welcomed by their lost brother Joseph in Egypt. And then in time enslaved, and of course we know through the plagues of his plagues, Moses channels through God. They escape Pharaoh's grasp. And Moses, as we said yesterday, is a prophet, which means he is not divine. He won't be allowed into the promised land because he actually claims credit for a miracle, bringing water from a rock, if we recall, and that is an abomination to God according to Judaism. So here we see him channeling again God's power. His two priests, Aaron and Levi, are holding his hands up because those arms are channeling God's power to assist Joshua as he initially battles the Canaanites. And there's just so much uniqueness and detail to this story. This is why I accept its truth to a great degree. So then we know the Israelites now, through God's almighty power, expand into this land that has been known as Palestine, named after the Philistines who'd been there prior to Joshua's contest, believe it or not. They've been there longer than Israel. And they settle down into, of course, these various tribes and completely conquer the Canaanites. Frankly, it's a genocide. There are things about the Bible that aren't that pretty, in my opinion, and holy war is one of those things that we don't see in the Asian religions, but we do see it in the Abrahamic religions. And so the conquest is complete by the time, especially we can say, of David. One thing, now this is a very big headache here. People reconstructing the Bible, and mostly it's been those Germans. They like to slice things up, dice them, cross them. They're good with watches. They're just as good with the Bible. So they sliced it all up into these bits. And now we can see, you can see from here, before 1100, it's all oral tradition, these stories about Abraham and the like. And then the Yahwist, the writer who uses the word Yahweh to speak of God, his texts are written roughly 900 to 1,000 before the Common Era, so the Bible doesn't exist yet. The E refers to the Elohimist, the man whose writings, or men whose writings, form those texts that refer to God as Elohim. The P to the priests who compiled both, and then the Deuteronomist who added much to the law and to the stories. They've been edited, they've been scrubbed up. And even 2 creation stories in Genesis. One I mentioned, let man create us. Well, we will create man in our image, is one creation story by the Elohimist. The Yahwist tells us the story of Eve emerging from Adam's side. So in fact, there's not one even Genesis creation story, but at least, well, 2. And so, by the time of King David, and we may know his story, the scrawny, smart guy uses his sling and kills the giant Goliath with a rock. No one was brave enough to face Goliath, allegedly. I think 9'7". Do you believe that? I don't know if I do. Point is, David and Solomon will establish a big empire, and this is going to be the heyday for Israel. It will never be this big or this powerful as in the time of Kings David and Solomon. And Solomon will build the first temple. Having been nomadic people, they just had carried the Ark of the Covenant, the laws of Moses, in a tabernacle or a tent. Now they will have a temple. So there's the empire, and there is an alleged reconstruction of Solomon's temple. Then what many don't know, around 800 before the Common Era, the 12 tribes, the empire, if you will, kingdom of David and Solomon, break up into a civil war. And what we have here are the northern 11 tribes cut themselves off from Judah, the biggest tribe. And in fact, Judah is technically speaking not Israel. And the word Jew or Jewish refers to this tribe, not the northern faction. There is a term for these northern Israelites, and there are a few hundred around today who claim descent from this northern Israel, and it may surprise you to learn they are called Samaritans. So when Jesus, for example, is talking about the Good Samaritan, it would be like a Southern Confederate Johnny Reb talking about the good Yankee. It might be offensive, right? We don't know how offensive Jesus' stories are without knowing the history and background. So they will go on their own way and have their holy mountain, Mount Gerizim, and they will tell you to this day they're the true descendants of Moses' tradition. Those Judeans broke off from them, not the other way around. So as time progresses, the Bible becomes really Judea's possession as we have it today. We get it from the Judeans. In the Bible, after the 5 books of Moses and the mythological elements, Tower of Babel, Genesis, and the like, we get real history. And the Bible is amazingly accurate with history. We don't see this in India, or really even China. China's a little better at history. India's great at maths and abstract thought, as we may have noticed with Buddhism, Hinduism, but not at history. We don't even know when the Buddha was born at all. But we do know that, for example, Nineveh fell in 727 on the afternoon, very close. The Bible's within a decade of that date. In the Bible, we see these anti-temple prophets. And that means that these figures, Amos, Jeremiah, and Elijah, oppose the subjugation of the poor by the rich, and they oppose the use of the temple and God's name to engage in enslaving other people. So these are the anti-temple prophets, and they are the ones who castigate Israel for falling away from the covenant, because, let's not forget, it is a slave-freeing religion from the time of Moses on. So it is an anti-slavery religion. And I will argue that in European culture or modern America, and historically largely the Islamic countries, we see a relative degree of egalitarian social action compared to the Eastern and Asian religions, where we have things like the caste system or Confucius' hierarchy built in. The Bible does not like these things. And let's just take a look. We can't forget the pro-temple prophets. For Haggai, build me a house, says God. The other gods have houses. I deserve a nice temple. But we'll see the anti-temple prophets take a different view. Let's look at this scene from Elijah's life. And by the way, his name is big propaganda. El is Yah. That's what his name means. That means the generic God of the Middle East, or the Levant, Canaan region, is actually Yahweh. So we have a shift in perspective, and here he's castigating the evil Ahab and the even more evil, painted lady Jezebel. The Bible does not like painted ladies. Sorry. I bet I offended most ladies here. The Bible does not like it if you style your hair either. The Bible wants humble men and women. People forget, men too should wear head coverings and have beards like God intended. Those are Bible fashions. Muslims get picked on for that today, but nobody thinks, well, geez, this is Elijah here, look. It's the same style as Osama bin Laden. Uh-oh, did I go too far? Make you mad, would I? So when we look at those fashions, I think it's important to remember the tremendous history of Bible fashions and why there are these Bible fashions. It's so that we'll all treat each other equally, and we won't have kings and painted ladies. Now, Elijah defeats the prophets of Baal, we may recall, in lighting literally a holocaust, the burnt offering. Jehovah delivers, Baal does not. But then we see something that does play out as I see it. I call it as I see them. That plays out in the later history of the Abrahamic religions. And we don't see these things that I'm about to show you in the Asian religions. And here it is. After Elijah defeats those priests, he orders them to be massacred. So the intolerance of social hierarchies and the like of the Bible is also, to some degree, an intolerance of other beliefs and traditions going back to him, at least. Even, we could say, Moses, smashing the golden calf. Elijah is one of the few to ascend into heaven without dying. And here we have Amos, and he goes to the northern tribes of Israel. He's actually a Judean, but he castigates Amaziah the priest. And he says, because you oppress the poor and needy, Amaziah, and you support this with the temple you're running, God will send the Assyrians to cook your women, those he calls cows of Bashan. Right? That's very insulting to call women cows. But he's referring to the aristocratic elite who, quote, sell the needy for a pair of shoes. So this is the baby in the Bible bathwater, this idea that God hates the oppression of the poor. And so, in fact, it will happen. The Assyrians will haul away the aristocrats of Israel. And Amos is right. Hosea marries a prostitute to show that Israel, too, is a prostitute and is not a proper, obedient wife to her husband, Jehovah, Yahweh. And so we see this kind of theme, and we see really a repudiation of the standard God set up with Zeus and friends in the Bible as Jehovah becomes increasingly abstract, as an abstract principle beyond our world altogether. So the Jews have quite the history of sorrow and suffering, as I bet we all know. Again, unlike these Asian religions. And they will be hauled away in the north to Assyria and held in captivity. They will hardly recover. They, as I say, barely exist today as Samaritans, but their elite and educated, the priests included, are hauled away to Assyria, and within 100 years, so are the elite and the educated of Judea. It's not every person who is held in captivity, but all the intellectuals, the repositories of the religious tradition. By the middle of the first millennium, before the Common Era, does anybody remember the word for that time? Axial age. Students, it takes, I don't know how many, get that concept. The Bible has one too. We saw it with the Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tzu, and the Upanishads in Hinduism. The overarching framework appears to Isaiah. In the time of Elijah, we can see he's battling the priests of Baal. And we can see evidence in the 5 books of Moses that there are other gods, just Jehovah's our God. And our God can beat up the other gods. Our God can beat up Pharaoh. As I say, it's going from Packers to Viking, though. Your God rules a certain turf, but by the time of Isaiah, it's very clear that there is only one God. And here is the famous phrase that points to the certainty that the Bible has reached an axial age perspective. Isaiah knows there is no other God but the God of Israel. There is only one God. Heaven is his throne, and earth is my footstool. And that pretty much sums up the relationship of God to human beings in the Abrahamic religions. Only now there is no Vishnu, according to Isaiah. There is no Jude. That's really about the only competitor for major godness. Because, of course, the Buddha doesn't have a god, nor does Lao Tzu nor Confucius. No gods in those religions, so we can let Isaiah have this claim. And so, denouncing other gods very clearly in Isaiah, let's just look, he makes it so certain. No God formed before me, nor will there be after me. I am Yahweh. There is no other Savior but me. And it's worth mentioning the meaning of this name for God, Yahweh. YHWH are Hebrew letters pointing to translate it best into English, he or that which brings into being. Not a personal name at all. It's an indirect reference to the creator of everything. So by Isaiah's time we have all that, and idols are forbidden in Israel. By the 623, Josiah will get rid of all the feminine images in the temple of Judea. There were feminine goddesses worshipped as late as that time in history by Israelites. He has the Ashtaroth trees cut down. This refers to the worship of Astarte or Ashtaroth, a female goddess. I met a woman who was doing her dissertation, she said, on Mrs. Yahweh. Sorry, ladies, Mrs. Yahweh. Jehovah divorced her, apparently. And who knows what happened to her? She's gone. Josiah gets rid of, and this surprises people, male prostitutes in the temple. Whoa, Powell, you're making that up. But yes, prior to, well, this is the time of the Deuteronomist, 623 or so, King Josiah The temple of Judea, of the Jews, was a very different place than it will be after the axial age and after the middle of the first millennium. So prior to the temple period, God was the Shekinah, or presence, or tent, literally, of the people. And the Judeans and the Israelites maintain a certain, after the captivities, they return to their homelands. Persian Emperor Cyrus allows the Jewish elite to return to their land, and they do. And by the time of Alexander the Great, just shortly after they return, they are now dominated by Greek culture. Now, you can imagine the Greeks erecting idols to Zeus and the other gods would not please these Judeans. Now, we're going to call them Judeans, not Israelites, because that's where the Bible's taken us. And imagine this. Well, in modern culture, we often in the media are looking down on Muslims for their women having a head covering. Men are supposed to as well, by the way. But what if we took the opposite route? As I ask my students, what if I were to throw the discus nude in the Marathon Park? Oh my goodness. That's what these Greek guys did. Those depictions of them naked are for real. Gymnos means naked boy. Gymnasium, or a gym, is the naked place for the men to do their wrestling and everything. I bet even we prefer a bit of Bible fashion, don't we? Even if we're atheist or agnostic, I would imagine I'd be arrested if I tried that, right? Students always say I'd last 10 minutes and the cops will be there for me. So this was enormously offensive to the Jews in Judea now, as were so many of these idolatrous elements the Greeks carried with them, and they dominated them. But what happens in this period, Judaism, now we can call it Judaism for sure, it's not Israelite religion, spreads throughout the Greek Empire because these are advanced, well-educated people. It's not for nothing the Bible came through and dominated even our modern society. The Epic of Gilgamesh doesn't. Hardly anyone's even heard of it. And likewise, Hellenism and Greek philosophy. We looked at Socrates as the axial age figure for the Greeks. And we'll see the idea that Socrates and Plato and friends had of a universal consciousness rather than Zeus and friends, these cartoony people, becomes increasingly the norm for the educated Greek elite. This idea converges in some times, that really takes centuries, with this Jewish idea of the abstract creator God who is beyond our world. These ideas conflict, but they will come together, both in Judaism and the successor to Judaism, or I should say not successor, the major branch of Judaism that we today call Christianity. Because we can't forget Christianity is a branch, but a legitimate branch in my opinion. Many Jews say, Christianity, that's a fake and fraud, worshiping a divine man. That's not Jewish. Well, yes, it is, in fact. Judaism is many things, like many religions are. They get free for 100 years, and the Hanukkah festival is very unimportant for Jewish people. If you want to send a Jewish person a card, a Yom Kippur card will be better. The Day of Atonement for Sin, although I don't know if Hallmark makes such a card. Hanukkah, the oil in the temple lamps burnt a few days longer than they were supposed to. It's a little holiday for Jewish people, and many I have known get annoyed that Christians and others think, Hanukkah, not a big deal. It just happens to come near Christmas, so for Jewish little boys and girls, they get 11 days of presents. I like to brag about that, just to outdo the Christians. So there's the second temple rebuilt when the Jews return to their homeland, and by the time of Jesus, we have at least 4 branches. of Jewish tradition. The Zealots, who want to kick the Romans out by force, we could say like the modern-day Zionists, not necessarily that religious about Jehovah, but they do want their culture preserved and they want to rule themselves and kick the Romans out. That will be a disastrous policy for the Jews, though. You don't mess with Rome. And then the Essenes, mystics, who many think Jesus may well have been an ascetic mystic because John the Baptist is his associate. And John the Baptist, as we know, opposes the Jewish political elite to the point where Salome has his head eventually on a platter for Herod. But these people were mystics and expected the end times and God's appearance at any moment. Then we have the Sadducees. If we read the Gospel of John carefully, we see an account of the trial of Jesus, and it seems pretty clear to me it's the Sadducees who want Jesus dead. The Romans have no interest in executing what they thought of as religious crazy guys. They didn't. They're worried about these zealots, though. And why would the Sadducees are running the temple? The Pharisees are actually the good guys and the ancestors of all modern Jews. Jewish rabbi's daughter once said, you know, I really hate it when Christians tear off on the Pharisees. She says, those are my ancestors. They created synagogue Judaism, not the big temple with its big business. So why would the temple priest here, Caiaphas, oppose Jesus? And who's responsible for this crucifixion? It is a Roman method of execution, particularly cruel. Jewish methods of execution, had Jesus been killed by those, would have been strangulation. Much better way to go than this. Tens of thousands of people were executed by Romans for what they thought were treason or rebellion, with what I like to call these as billboards, basically saying, don't mess with Rome. Tens of thousands of people on the Appian Way were strung up like this in northern Italy for rebellion. The Spartacus slave rebellion, those people were all crucified. So you say, well, Powell, then clearly he was killed by the Romans. And of course, you know, all of this consciousness comes from being on the invasion route.